will come as a great shock, but as a totally impartial observer, guess what, I agree with you. I certainly agree much more with Stephanie, and there's no point in repeating why. She did a very good job. I like particularly that very large graph with the amount of money that's spent on highways and the tiny amount that's spent on transit, and the inordinate amount of stuff we read about how we can't afford transit. And let me take a couple of examples out of the Boston metropolitan area to just emphasize that point. The region just adopted a transportation plan which is supposed to be realistically constrained to the amount of money that's likely to be available. Now there's a huge trap in that, and we've been caught in this trap at least since Ronald Reagan, which is that conservatives figured out a while ago that if you give away all the money to tax breaks for the rich so there's no money on the table and starve the beast, then you can argue that the deficit makes it impossible to do anything. So the whole premise of these fiscally constrained programs, when we haven't adjusted our funding for transportation to keep pace with inflation, is a non-solvable problem to begin with. You can't maintain what we've got. You can't build anything new if you live within that trap. So playing by the rules of that game are a losing game to begin with. Secondly, if you ignore that for the moment and look at what just happened when the Metropolitan Planning Organization voted a bunch of projects, they did not include a large number of transit projects that have been on the books for at least 30 years, and if they had been built on time, would have cost a lot less money than they're going to cost now to do. They're desperately needed for the system. But they voted to fund a number of highway projects that have had very little analysis and make no sense at all. Let me give you an example. Is anybody here from the Lexington, Lincoln, Concord area? Okay. One of the highway projects that's slated to move forward is a flyover on Route 2 to fly over Crosby Corner. For those of you who don't necessarily do that every day, if you drive out of Boston, get to Alewife and head out Route 2, it seems a lot like an interstate highway till you get to Route 128. It is fairly grade separated from 128 out to a place called Bedford Road, where there's a traffic light. And then there's a big hill and a curve at Crosby Corner, and that next piece of Route 2 is got several traffic lights. So what's slated to go forward now is a gigantic viaduct overpass at Crosby Corner that will fly you over Crosby Corner. So if you're heading in town, by the way, I live in the city, but my daughter lives out in Littleton, so I actually do drive an automobile and I know the place a little. So if you're driving in town from, let's say, Acton, you'll fly over this wonderful Crosby Corner overpass, and you're going to think you're on an interstate highway, but they're going to run into a traffic light at Bedford Road and probably have a rear-end collision with the cars. This is a throwback to the kind of really stupid highway plans that were going forward, particularly by the MDC back in the days when, if you had a little money, go out and build an underpass, move the bottleneck from this intersection to the next one. That'll be great. Then people will be mad about the next one, then we'll get the money to build the next one. The more the system doesn't work, the more it proves that you need money to build the next overpass or the next underpass. The current highway program that just got approved is full of those kind of, I would argue, very senseless ways to spend money. If you think about the process of building Route 2, this overpass, the process of building this overpass is going to make life miserable for everyone who's driving on Route 2 while this new thing is constructed. And they're gonna grunt most of the time because it's gonna take a lot longer to get to work. And then when it's all done, they'll fly through and they'll hit the same traffic light at Bedford Road. Now, if we had an infinite number of dollars to spend on highway projects, at least if people were proposing to build an underpass at Bedford Road and an overpass at Crosby Corner, I might say, well, I'm not sure that's where I'd put my priority, but at least there might be some sense that when it was done, it would work. This is a lot of money, a lot of inconvenience, and at the end, it doesn't work. So, I are a civil engineer. I tend to look at things in a physical way. A lot of these highway projects that are in what was just approved make no sense at all. What did the recent plan not include on the highway list? I've spent most of my life advocating for transit. I had a minor dalliance with a highway project for a while. My wife has forgiven me. But let me talk about highways. Some of you may have read that a chunk of concrete about 3 weeks ago fell from the Cambridge Street Bridge on the approach, a bridge owned by the Mass Turnpike Authority. On the approach going onto the turnpike, a chunk of the bridge fell through the windshield of the lady driving the automobile. We're very lucky she didn't die. It must have been very frightening. As far as I know, there were not serious injury. The reaction of the engineers and stated at the public meeting was, oh yeah, that happened 3 weeks ago too, it's just that the press didn't hear about it. That has been going on. The part of the Mass Pike from Route 128 into South Station was built more or less 1959. It's falling apart, literally falling apart, in a manner that endangers lives. If the viaduct that runs near Boston University, the one that goes over some roads and tracks and then dives under the BU Bridge, if you've driven into town on the turnpike, that viaduct has been dropping chunks of concrete on the trains below for the past 3 years at least. The solution finally was to put some planks underneath it so when the concrete falls it won't hit the train, but it's still falling. The strategy adapted to deal with this a couple of years ago was what I call the don't ask, don't tell strategy. The engineer's budget was cut so that they couldn't come in with reports on how terrible the condition was, so they wouldn't have to face the fact they need money to fix this thing that is falling apart. It is near criminal. This is serious stuff. The turnpike is not in the approved plan. Why? Because about 5 years ago when the bureaucracy was putting it together, Matt Amarillo was running the turnpike. Governor Romney didn't like Matt Amarillo. I don't know why, they were both Republicans. Whatever the reason was, none of the Turnpike Authority stuff got onto the list. So here we are, we're dealing with a list that has what might be as best considered cosmetic surgery, and I would argue counterproductive ones like Crosby Corner. It doesn't deal with a chunk of concrete falling through this lady's windshield. If the viaduct by BU has to be limited in terms of the loads that it can handle, which from a safety point of view is the next step, then all the trucks on the Mass Pike are going to come pouring off of that interchange in Alston. Can't get on Storrow Drive, that's a parkway and the bridges are too low, can't get onto Memorial Drive. So they're on River Street in Cambridge, dodging the kids playing jump rope on the sidewalk. This is an outrageous failure to pay attention to any kind of priority. I'm just talking within highways. Now, if we look at the transit side, the same document claims that the MBTA is going to carry 50% more people within the next 20 years. Now, how many people in this room have been on the Green Line in the past month? Lots of room there for 50% increase, right? The system is full. The Green Line's operating beyond its practical capacity. The Red Line is operating a little bit beyond its practical capacity. The Orange Line is just about at its practical capacity. The Blue Line is the only line that has a little bit of extra capacity because they're almost finished lengthening the stations so that they can accommodate 6-car trains instead of 4-car trains. When that happens, there'll actually be a little bit of space there. But the project not on the list that David showed, the connection of the blue line to the red line so that you can get from East Boston or Revere to the Mass General Hospital and do a simple transfer if you're going to Kendall Square, that's not on the list. It's the one place where we've got room for more people on the MBTA, on the rail system, and that's not even on the list. Conservation Law Foundation has been fighting the good fight on that for a decade. The thing was supposed to be open by the year 2000. It's not even on this year's list. So there's something very broken, and there's a very disproportionate amount of attention in negative attacks on transit, with no attention at all to the non-policy that's happening on the highway side, even within the highway domain. So there is something very badly broken here in the lack of transparency. To me, the landmark occurrence in the Boston metropolitan area over the past 50 years was when Alan Altshuler under Governor Sargent did the moratorium on highways and the Boston Transportation Planning Review that a lot of us participated in. I see Tony Pangaro here. I'm sure there's some others I just haven't seen. But while I happen to love the outcome of that, it basically said no more highways of significance within Route 128, except for a couple of minor exceptions called replacing the artery and building the tunnel below and set those to the side. But it shifted the focus to improving public transportation, relocating and expanding the capacity of the Orange Line, relocating the Red Line from Harvard Square out to Alewife, from Harvard and from down the southern end beyond Quincy to Braintree, refurbishing all of the commuter rail, all those decisions, and limiting the number of parking spaces in downtown Boston to reinforce the idea that if you're going downtown, you ought to go on public transportation, and we shouldn't be wasting a lot of money building the parking garages, and we shouldn't be wasting a lot of space building the parking garages, as Stephanie pointed out. So that set of decisions, I happen to agree with the outcome. We can talk about that if there are questions on the outcome. But as to the process, it was the best process in the United States that's occurred in transportation by that time or since, in the amount of transparency on what was put on the table. There wasn't a lot of spin in that. There were real facts put on the table and people could hash it out. The kind of lack of transparency that puts in the small print that the green line is going to carry 50% more people and does nothing about it. It doesn't even put in any print at all that the turnpike is falling apart. I mean, that's the opposite of what Alan Altshuler gave us back in 1970. And I would submit we really have to get to that kind of transparency if we're going to have a reasonable chance to solve these. I realize I'm talking too long. Let me say a couple of things quickly. We have the Danielle principle that I want to explain to you. Danielle is my granddaughter. When she was about 5 years old, she was at the house, and she was at the age where little Italian-American kids are beginning to realize that when they eat spaghetti, they're eating cut up in little pieces, and the big people are eating it twirled on a fork. So Danielle asks, for spaghetti like everyone else has. So my wife gives her the spaghetti. Danielle's trying to twirl it, and she's kind of not succeeding. And at a certain point, she has a few mouthfuls, and then she kind of drops her fork sort of loudly and says, "Grandma, I'm full." And my wife, who is very attentive, says, "Oh, Danielle, would you like Grandma to cut it up in little pieces you could eat with a spoon?" And she said, "Oh, Grandma, that would be so nice, but I'd still be full." Well, we ought to listen to Danielle. Our planet is dying from the amount of garbage we're putting into the air. It is full. It was full in 1990. It was full by the pollutants and the greenhouse gases that have been generated since 1790, not since 1990. We've got all kinds of nonsense analysis that is all spin coming out of academic institutions saying if we do better than business as usual, that's a saving. But the business as usual trajectory is the one that Stephanie just showed you of the problem getting worse and worse, and as she said, you could close all the electric plants and still not make it because you're going in the wrong direction. We should at least be going in the right direction. Danielle principle totally fails on the greenhouse gas side. let's go within greenhouse gas, health pollutants, again, we're putting more junk into the air than you could afford. Danielle would say that's not a good idea. What about the roadway system? It's got more cars than it can handle. Doesn't work. What about the green line? It's got more people than it can handle. You got to do something about it. It's the Danielle principle that we need to get straight. The second set of things I put, I should, let me say one other thing and then I'll put a few equations on the wall, pretending to be from MIT, okay? In terms of, a Globe editorial writer called me a couple of weeks ago saying, oh, we're looking at too many transit projects. They're not looking at the highway projects at all. We're looking at too many transit projects. This doesn't make sense. What are we doing? Why, someone told me we're actually considering 4 subways. Isn't that ridiculous? Okay, Dan Grabowskis is here, I think. I saw him when I came in. Dan had some terrific graphics up in Copley Station, which has been under reconstruction, that talk about the date of the opening of the Copley Station, and now it's 100 years later. I think it was 2014, and it'll be completed and nice even before 2015, you know, about 100 years. It was a nice graphic. Read the graphics on the walls of Park Street and the one at Copley. In 1897, we opened the Green Line. In 1904, we did the Blue Line. In 1908, we did the Orange Line. In 1912, we did the Red Line. We built 4 subways, the core of the system without which the city would not function at all, in the space of less than 20 years. We did it, my grandfather worked on some of those, pick and shovel. We did it with human labor. The most sophisticated technology they had was steam shovels. They didn't have any federal money. They got an incredible amount done. And we're sitting around whining and saying, oh my goodness, which projects should we build? Oh, let's do nothing, so that they'll all inflate in cost. We've been going through that nonsense with a system that's full and needs to be expanded. As a political problem, you notice that the Silver Line 3 had, as a relative matter, the most attractive numbers in that list. You can quibble about the numbers, but the key to the Silver Line is it and the red-blue connectors are the only ideas on the table at all which will relieve the congestion on the Green Line. If we want to do more to relieve the congestion on the Green Line and at Park Street and at State Street, where if you've ever substation, if you've ever made the transfer, you'll notice it's pretty tough to go up the stairway when everybody's coming down and vice versa. This system needs relief, and the only 2 ideas on the table are the blue to red connector and Silver 3. And that's the real important. It's physical. And if you are going to accommodate the growth, you've got to deal with it. Now, I also happen to believe that the urban ring is very important, and we've got to support the growth in the only sector of our economy that's growing. And again, I don't want to repeat too much what Stephanie said, but we've got to be serious about the Danielle principle. How much fits, and what are we going to do about it? So the formulas that I want you to think about are something like this. Pretending these are formulas, the marginal social value of the environment is approaching infinity. We are destroying the planet. We've got to do something about it. I'll come back to that in a minute. The marginal social cost of labor at the margin is 0. If you've ever seen unemployment, it's very ugly stuff. People are trying to spin things that our economy is growing again. Joblessness is growing. When there aren't jobs, people get very nasty and depressed. This is a social disaster. Putting people to work is a good thing to do. These aren't costs, they're benefits. Marginal social value of accessibility may not be infinite, but people want access, the kind of access that Stephanie was talking about. The puzzle is, how do you solve this equation? If we have to spend some money, and we have to expand the Green Line, to build the urban ring, to do the blue-red connector, mostly it's going to produce jobs. And you know what? You can't dig a ditch in Boston with a laborer who lives in Naples. They got to come to America to dig the ditch. These are local jobs. You can't drive a bus in Dorchester unless the guy lives, or the lady lives somewhere near there in Dorchester. These public transportation investments generate American jobs. Where do the dollars go that you pour into the tank of your automobile? They're going right out the door to Saudi Arabia. Those are leaving the economy, and they're going into pockets that hate us and are funding things to destroy us. This is totally nuts. Now, back on the social value to the environment, I'll be done in just a second. Okay, 1 minute. To echo one more time Stephanie's point, I love Obama. It's terrific that he's finally pushed this thing over the top, and the California car is going to be the rule by 2016, and we're going to have 36 miles per gallon. The vehicles we build today, the good news is they last about 200,000 miles. The bad news is they last about 200,000 miles. So when these better cars come available in 5 or so years, we still have 15 years worth of vehicles whose fuel economy is lousy, and they're going to be circulating for a long, long time. So in addition to the fact that the vehicle miles traveled in automobiles is rising faster than the improvement in the technology, any reasonable prognosis has the amount of greenhouse gas being generated by automobiles getting worse and worse. And the only way, consistent with three-dimensional space and the Danielle principle, the only way we can turn this around, yes, we have to get the cars as good as we can get them, and Obama's doing that, but you're not going to get much more out of that. You're not going to squeeze any more juice out of that orange. You've got to shift to modes that use less energy and don't get stuck with the trap of measuring that per person mile travel. As Globe reporter Bob Campbell said at a conference I was at, we need shorter trips, not fatter roads. The silent trick in a lot of the analysis that you see is that it's per mile. On a per mile basis, if someone wants to commute from Los Angeles to Boston in an airplane, that doesn't look bad in comparison to the automobile or the bus. You've got to deal with the length of the trips being made, not just the fuel efficiency, or this problem is not physically solvable. If you put those things together, you need transit, both because it's more effective on the efficiency side from a fuel point of view, but even more because it produces and supports the kind of density that's essential if we're going to solve this problem. I saw some data 2 weeks ago that says basically the carbon production out of New York is less than a third of the carbon production per capita, is less than a third of the carbon production per capita of the United States. The carbon production of London per capita is about a third, 40% of the UK. Cities are simply more efficient, and we need to move in that direction. This isn't elective surgery, we're destroying the planet. So I think this is real important stuff, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to it, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Think about. Save the planet, save the city. 5-minute break. Let's keep it very short so we can get back and still have about a half an hour, 35 minutes for questions and answers.